Welcome to Beyond the Comfort Zone. Today, we are diving deep into a really powerful piece of material. It's the Architectural Insights with KING-KAMBUF, Daily Interdisciplinary Mentorship Brief for Tuesday, December 23, 2025. And what's so compelling here is that this material is a direct challenge, really, to the idea that architectural excellence just stops at a beautiful set of drawings. For those of you who really want to lead projects at an institutional scale, well, this brief, it defines the true levers of influence.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is it's laser focused. We're aiming to help you achieve what we're calling architectural power literacy. We want to move you, the listener, beyond the foundational skills of, form and space, and into this much rarer territory where design meets finance and risk and the law. We're analyzing how a mastery of contracts, of governance, of risk, and maybe most surprisingly, the architecture of movement itself, how those are the things that truly define a successful project.
We have a dual focus today, which really outlines that highest echelon of practice. In the first half, we're going to tackle the politics of how buildings get built. That's all about procurement models, risk allocation, and the contractual agreements that underpin every single financial decision. Then we're going to pivot to the architecture of movement, urban mobility, how the curb is being managed, and how our building designs have to interface with these constantly changing city rules.
Yeah, and the core premise here is just so critical for gaining influence. It's that architecture is sculpted just as much by contracts and governance, these invisible forces, as it is by the physical drawings and materials. We're essentially providing you with a shortcut, a really concentrated analysis, so you can understand precisely where power and liability and money truly move through complex, large-scale projects. This isn't about knowing what a contract is. It's about mastering how it shapes every single one of your design choices.
Okay, so let's unpack this monumental shift that we're seeing in the industry. The traditional model, design, bid, build, or DBB, that linear process where the architect finishes the drawings, then the owner bids the project out. It just seems to be losing its hold, especially with public clients and massive institutional work. Why are institutions walking away from a process that's been the standard for, decades?
Well, the primary reason is that DBB is inherently adversarial, and it's just highly inefficient for complex projects. It gives you this illusion of cost certainty early on, but really it just guarantees maximum friction late in the process. The drive away from DBB it's all about a need for efficiency and predictable risk management. Under DBB, the contractor has zero input on the design. They bid based on complete documents, and then inevitably, they dispute those documents during construction, and that leads to massive change orders, schedule delays, and, litigation.
Okay, so if that process is failing, what are the leading alternatives that are replacing it?
We're seeing a really significant rise in integrated delivery models. The key ones are design build, or DB, construction manager, general contractor, CMGC, integrated project delivery, IPD, and then various alliance models. Each one of these methods forces collaboration to happen much, much earlier in the timeline. That's the essential difference. For instance, in design build, the contractor is brought in from day one. They often hire the architect themselves. In CMGC, you have a construction manager advising the design team on cost and constructability long before the final bid.
What's fascinating here, and what the source material really emphasizes, is that the delivery method isn't just some administrative or financial choice anymore. It's becoming a core design variable. It actually dictates the depth of collaboration, the potential for innovation, and critically, your liability exposure.
Absolutely. Think about the risk profile. In DBB, right, the architect is protected by professional liability insurance against, errors and omissions in the drawings. The liability is transferred, in large part, to the documents themselves. But then you look at integrated project delivery, or IPD. This is where the real paradigm shift happens. IPD requires the three main parties, the owner, architect, and contractor, to sign a single multi-party agreement. And that agreement intentionally pools both the risk and the reward.
Okay, I want to challenge you on that idea of pooling risk. If I'm an architect, and my primary expertise is design, and now I'm contractually responsible for cost overruns that my contractor caused, doesn't that fundamentally disincentivize me from innovative design? Doesn't it just push me towards safer, more standard construction methods?
That's the central challenge that IPD addresses, and it's exactly why it demands this new level of architectural power literacy. The financial structure of IPD, it includes a shared risk pool and shared contingency funds. If the project comes in under budget, the savings are shared among all three partners. If it goes over budget, the overrun is drawn from that pool, hitting everyone's bottom line before it ever impacts the owner. So the central question for you, the architect, becomes, how do you design differently when risk is shared And you have real skin in the game on constructability and cost certainty.
That immediately changes the conversation in the design room. It forces this continuous integrated feedback loop. Can you give us a concrete example? How does this IPD structure change an actual design decision that might have been made differently under a DBB model?
Sure. Let's consider the structural system for a major university research lab. Under DBB, an architect might specify a complex, non-standard structural system. Maybe it's aesthetically appealing or provides maximum future flexibility. They just assume the contractor will bid on it. The risk of that complexity leading to cost overruns, that's entirely on the contractor who wins the bid. But under IPD, the architect is sitting across the table from the structural engineer and the construction manager during schematic design. The CM might point out that, hey, that complex joint system you've designed requires 6 weeks of highly specialized on-site welding, which would completely blow the shared contingency fund. The IPD structure immediately incentivizes the architect to pivot to a different system, say precast elements with simpler connections. That is less risky and ensures the project hits its target value. Even if the initial design vision has to be moderated a bit, you maintain the design intent by leveraging the contractor's knowledge early, securing value instead of fighting a change order war later on.
That's a profound difference. You're shifting from just dictating a solution to collaborating on the optimal delivery mechanism for a performance goal.
And that fluency in delivery methods is precisely why architects are now being evaluated so differently. We're seeing procurement transition from that lowest bid approach to selection based on qualifications-based, value-based, and performance-based metrics.
I remember when public projects were just a race to the bottom, only the lowest fee won. That transition toward value-based selection, that seems like a massive opportunity for high-quality firms.
It is a giant opportunity. The source material emphasizes that architects are being evaluated more and more on their process literacy, not just their portfolio aesthetics. Winning a major proposal, an RFP today, say, for a high-profile net-zero civic campus, it's not about who has the flashiest rendering anymore. It's about demonstrating an absolute mastery of public procurement law, a sophisticated system for cost management, and clear, measurable performance metrics.
So if the drawings themselves aren't enough, how exactly does an architect demonstrate this value beyond the physical design? What specific documentation or, process literacy are we talking about here?
We're talking about quantifiable performance metrics presented right there in the proposal. It means showing, for instance, that your firm's internal data sharing protocols, specifically how you use BIM for quantity takeoffs and clash detection, results in a historical change order rate that is, say, 5% lower than the industry average. It means demonstrating that you understand the financial model. Providing a lifecycle costing analysis that shows that while your high-performance facade costs 10% more upfront, it reduces operational energy costs by 30% over 20 years.
So the value proposition shifts from we make beautiful buildings to we guarantee predictable financial and operational performance.
Precisely. You're demonstrating value through the predictability and security you offer the client. This involves a deep knowledge of regulations, things like findings from the Global Infrastructure Procurement Review or local government design mandates. The architect has to proactively show they understand the financial and legal governance surrounding the project, which reinforces their role as a sophisticated risk manager.
This transition, especially the rise of IPD, it also seems like it would force architectural firms to fundamentally rethink their internal structures. The traditional hierarchy, the star designer, the project manager, the job captain, that has to shatter if risk is truly shared.
Oh, it absolutely must. IPD directly challenges the rigid, isolated structure of so many traditional architecture firms. If profit and loss are shared across the owner, architect, and contractor, you simply cannot afford information silos or rigid internal command chains that delay decision-making. Firms have to rapidly reinvent their hierarchy, their data sharing protocols, and their internal profit models. The reliance on a shared digital asset like building information modeling or BIM further supports this. It just blurs the traditional professional boundaries of who owns the model data.
That brings us to a really critical challenge then. Can architects truly maintain or even lead the design vision when authorship and responsibility are intentionally distributed across the entire team? If the team succeeds together or fails together, does the architect's unique creative leadership get diluted?
It's really about redefining leadership. You move from being the sole creative author to becoming the conductor of these complex collaborative processes. You don't lose leadership, you transform it. You lead through establishing technical credibility, process fluency, and articulating design intent so clearly, often through detailed performance specifications, that it can survive the inevitable optimization challenges posed by the contractor. So when the contractor comes back with a cost-saving suggestion, your response can't be some artistic defense. It has to be a technical defense based on performance metrics that were established collaboratively from the start. This is how you secure design excellence because of the shared risk, not in spite of it.
Let's turn to the necessary foundation of practice: contracts.
Yeah.
Every aspiring professional gets grilled on this stuff during the ARE, can often feel, well, dry compared to the excitement of design. But as you said, contracts define the entire framework of professional life.
They define responsibility and liability. The contract is the ultimate risk mitigation document. If you fail to understand the nuances of the owner-architect agreement, you are implicitly accepting liability for scope gaps or for undefined services. It's the legal definition of the standard of care you promise to deliver, and it dictates what happens when the project invariably goes sideways.
Let's break down that shift in authority across the delivery models. We established that in DBB, the architect is the owner's agent, but how does that authority erode, I guess, when you move into design build or CMGC?
The erosion is most dramatic in design build. Under traditional DBB, the architect is the trusted advisor, the owner's representative during construction administration. The architect holds significant authority to interpret the drawings, to rule on disputes between the owner and the contractor. In CMGC, that relationship is maintained, but the construction manager often shares a lot of the cost and schedule advisory role. But in design build, the architect is typically relegated to being a subconsultant reporting directly to the builder.
Wow, that immediately creates a profound potential conflict of interest. If the architect's paycheck is coming from the entity whose primary goal is cost minimization, the contractor, how can they possibly maintain objectivity and, more importantly, protect the integrity of the design?
This requires a very strategic mindset. The conflict is absolutely real.
Right.
To protect the design, the architect has to front-load the design intent into clear, quantifiable performance specifications and material tolerances written into the contract before construction even starts. So instead of saying, use high-quality brick, you specify, use brick sourced from region X with a maximum water absorption rate of Y and a specific manufacturer's maintenance schedule. The architect's authority shifts from commanding adherence to detailed drawings to meticulously defining the performance criteria that the contractor is contractually obligated to meet, regardless of their internal cost-cutting choices.
Moving to financial governance. The source material really emphasizes early cost modeling. The adage that cost decisions are exponentially more effective the earlier they're made is repeated constantly. Why is this more critical now than ever before?
It's because of the demand for cost certainty, which brings us right back to the guaranteed maximum price, or GMP, contract structure. Owners, especially institutional clients, they cannot tolerate large financial surprises. They need a cap. So every hour you spend refining cost projections during schematic design saves hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars in dispute resolution during construction. If a design decision made at 50% design development adds $1 million to the budget, reversing it requires redrawing, recoordinating systems, rebidding, whereas changing it during concept design is just a conversation.
Okay, let's dedicate some serious time to this GMP structure. How exactly does a GMP contract allocate risk, and what is the architect's specific role in managing it, particularly when it comes to change orders?
The GMP is the contractor's promise that the project will not exceed that price, provided the scope remains fixed. This forces the contractor to absorb the risk of typical construction inefficiencies, errors, or omissions. The architect's role, though, is vital in protecting that GMP. You have to ensure the drawings are highly coordinated and crystal clear, minimizing any ambiguities that a contractor could exploit to claim a change order. A significant change order, which is a legal amendment to the contract demanding more money, only happens if the owner changes the scope or if the initial documents were materially flawed. The architect's documents become the boundary condition for the contractor's risk.
And within that GMP structure, the documents mention two critical financial concepts architects have to manage: allowances and contingencies. They sound similar to a layperson, but their purpose and risk profile are drastically different. Can you break that down with a clear, practical scenario?
Absolutely, and this distinction is crucial for liability management. Let's use a scenario for a municipal library project. Let's say it has a $40 million GMP. First, the allowance. An allowance is a set sum of money included inside the GMP budget for specific items where the selection is deferred by the owner. Say the final furniture package for the main reading room hasn't been chosen yet, or the final selection of exterior facade tile hasn't been made. The GMP might include a $150,000 allowance for architectural finishes. The risk here is borne by the owner. If the owner later selects a high-end tile that costs $250,000, that $100,000 difference is a legitimate change order. The owner has to pay it because the cost exceeded the allowance. The architect's job is just to make sure the allowance is realistic and well documented.
Okay, so the allowance is a placeholder for a known but undecided scope item. What about the contingency?
The contingency is completely different. This is a pool of funds held by either the owner or the contractor to cover unforeseen issues. Things like unexpected site conditions, design errors, or general omissions that only become apparent during construction. Let's say our library is being built on a previously undeveloped site, and the geotechnical report underestimated the amount of subsurface bedrock that needs to be removed. If that bedrock removal cost an extra $200,000, that would be paid from the contingency pool. The risk allocation varies based on who holds the contingency, but its purpose is to mitigate unknown project risk.
That makes the distinction crystal clear. The allowance is about owner choice risk. The contingency is about unforeseen project risk. And the architect needs to be highly literate in both to structure a financial agreement that protects everyone.
And all this complexity means the soft skills collaboration are more vital than ever. The sources stress that communication failures are the primary cause of disputes, far more than technical errors in drawing sets.
So if the breakdown is usually human, what are the professional tools used to manage this risk and enforce transparency?
The most essential and often underappreciated tool is the decision log. This is so much more than just meeting minutes. It's a constantly updated, legally defensible record of every critical decision made by the owner, the contractor, or the design team. It includes who was present, what alternatives were discussed, and what the final directive was. This document protects the architect from liability stemming from owner directives that might contradict the design intent, or from a contractor later claiming they didn't get crucial information. It enforces shared accountability by creating this objective history of the project's evolution.
Let's move to the ultimate legal imperative here. Procurement law basics, especially for public projects. Why does an architect who focuses on design need to be fluent in the statutes that govern bidding and government contracts?
Because public money requires public transparency, and that's governed by state or federal statute. This creates a really unique legal exposure. If a procurement process is perceived as unfair or biased or non-compliant with the required bidding structure, for instance, if the RFP favored one design firm too explicitly, a competing firm can file a protest.
And what happens when a protest is filed?
The project stops, dead in its tracks, potentially for months, while the administrative or judicial review process takes place. This can lead to catastrophic schedule delays, cost increases, political fallout, you name it. An architect who is proficient in procurement law proactively structures their RFP response and their initial engagement to adhere rigorously to the statutory requirements for transparency and fair selection. You win the project by being the safest legal bet, not just the best designer.
That brings us to the hypothetical proving ground mentioned in the brief. The Net Zero Civic Campus delivered via progressive design build. Walk us through why this specific model is the definition of architectural power literacy in practice.
Progressive design build, or PDB, is really the best of both worlds. It mandates that the design team, including the architect and the builder, are selected early based on qualifications, experience, and their capacity for collaboration. Crucially, they begin working together to define the scope and refine the design, but the guaranteed maximum price negotiation is deferred.
So you get the intensive collaboration of an IPD model, but without the immediate cost fixation of a traditional design build.
Exactly. This allows the team to establish design credibility before cost certainty. PDB rewards the team that's fluent in deep technical analysis, architecture, construction management, and public procurement law, because they have to demonstrate through their collaboration that they can achieve these complex net zero performance goals within a defined target budget, even before that budget is finalized and guaranteed.
So the winning strategy, as the source suggests, is positioning architecture as a risk reduction and value creation tool, not just another cost driver.
This is the strategic shift. You have to articulate how your design choices, say using a mass timber structure, actually reduces long-term operational costs and reduces schedule risk compared to a cheaper steel alternative because of faster assembly time and lower foundation requirements. You're selling the client predictability and value retention. And that requires moving beyond a traditional architectural defense of beauty and into a quantitative defense rooted in financial and political security.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time on the hidden governance inside the project. The contracts, procurement, liability. Now we need to make a sharp but really necessary pivot to the visible governance outside the project, the urban interface. The source material claims that streets aren't just leftover space anymore. They're the most contested civic real estate. I need you to explain why a mastery of just a single property line is no longer enough.
It's because the life of the building begins and ends at the curb. If that interface is broken, the building, no matter how beautiful it is inside, it fails operationally. It becomes a liability. Historically, the street was static. You had traffic lanes, sidewalks, and parking spots. That's it. Today, rapid technological and cultural shifts mean that the street edge is in constant flux. The new frontier for architects is understanding the curb as a managed, programmable asset.
Programmable asset. That sounds like something out of a futuristic zoning code. What does that mean in practice for a project today?
It means the curb is no longer just dedicated to static parking for 8 hours a day. Cities are replacing simple painted lines with sophisticated digital controls. We're seeing systems that manage dynamic pricing, where the cost of parking changes based on demand-specified delivery windows for commercial goods, dedicated micromobility zones for shared scooters, and instant emergency access controls.
So the key insight here is that street design is now policy design. If the city can update curb regulations with a digital permit system next week, my loading dock design might become instantly obsolete.
That's the liability exposure. Exactly. Architects must design buildings that can interface intelligently with these constantly changing street rules. Your loading zone has to be flexible enough to handle a 3-hour window for trucks in the morning, then convert to a ride-hail drop-off in the afternoon, and maybe even become a flex public space in the evening. This demands a resilient and adaptable ground floor design that can absorb these policy shocks without requiring costly physical renovation. The architect has to anticipate the changing policies, not just the existing code.
And this shift is physically embodied by the rise of micromobility technologies, e-bikes, scooters, cargo bikes. These vehicles are tangibly rewriting building sections, forcing us to reconsider the entire ground floor structure.
Oh, completely. They require architects to totally redesign the traditional notion of bike storage. We're talking about the necessity of rethinking ground floors, loading zones, ramps, and storage requirements. A traditional bike rack tucked into a corner is useless now. E-bikes require larger, secure charging and staging areas. And those lithium-ion batteries, they introduce a serious fire risk and require fire-rated separation and venting, forcing changes to your mechanical and fire suppression systems. Furthermore, the massive surge in urban cargo bikes, which often carry 400 or 500 pounds of goods, they require wider loading ramps, larger internal lifts, and much more generous turnaround space than a standard pushcart.
Which introduces the inevitable regulatory lag. If the technology is moving this fast, I imagine the existing regulatory frameworks are struggling to keep up.
They are, big time. The source material highlights that fire, accessibility, and structural codes are all struggling to keep pace. For example, local fire codes often restrict the size of lithium-ion battery banks you can store in commercial or residential buildings, and the regulations on charging safety are still evolving. An influential architect has to engage with the city fire marshal on a performance-based design to secure approvals for large-scale micromobility storage, rather than just waiting for the code to catch up in 3 years.
Shifting to a larger scale, mobility infrastructure itself is being reframed as the new civic monument. The complexity of these massive transit-oriented development, or TOD projects, must expand the architect's scope exponentially, way beyond the building's footprint.
TOD is the ultimate interdisciplinary challenge. The architect is no longer just designing a box near a train station. They are designing the entire multimodal interface. This includes responsibilities like station design, complex air rights utilization, designing towers that literally sit over active rail lines, phasing strategies for multi-year public works that can't just shut down, and engaging in sophisticated public-private governance models to finance the whole complex.
So this requires marrying design language with finance and logistics.
Precisely. The successful firm has to speak both design language and transportation economics. You have to understand passenger throughput models, how many people get off the train and need to get to the office lobby in 10 minutes, to design efficient circulation. You have to understand how maximizing the use of air rights above the station can generate the revenue stream the transit authority needs to fund the project, turning the design itself into a financial catalyst. That's the difference between a high-rise and a new civic monument.
Let's focus now on the hard consequences of poorly managed movement. Movement is a life safety issue. When we talk about poor site access, we are literally talking about creating safety, legal, and operational failures that can shut a project down.
This is a completely non-negotiable area. Every architect has to treat these foundational site access rules not as constraints, but as a proactive liability hedge. The first lesson, which often trips up designers who are only focused on their site plan, is understanding right-of-way constraints. Public streets are regulated completely independently of your client's private property line, which means not all design territory belongs to the client.
So even if my client bought the land right up to the curb, I still need permission and coordination for the sidewalk slope, the driveway apron, utility connections, and the relationship to the public street geometry.
Exactly. You have to coordinate with municipal engineering and planning departments because any change within that public right-of-way, even minor grading changes, requires a separate permit and review process. Mismanaging this relationship can lead to massive delays if the city refuses to issue a right-of-way permit near the end of construction. And this leads directly to the life safety geometry. We have to understand that geometry saves lives. Architects must have a fundamental grasp of turning radii in vehicle envelopes to ensure emergency and service vehicles can physically access and navigate the site.
Can you give us a scale example? What kind of vehicle dimensions are we talking about when designing site access for a major urban building?
Well, when you're designing a loading dock or a fire access lane, you are not designing for a sedan. You're designing for a heavy fire apparatus, maybe an articulating ladder truck, which can be 50 feet long and requires a substantial turning radius, sometimes 45 to 55 feet curb to curb, depending on the municipality. If your internal driveway or service court is too narrow, or if the landscape islands are too close to the drive path, that emergency vehicle cannot make the turn. This isn't a matter of opinion, it's a code violation that results in failure to secure an occupancy permit. And this extends to large garbage trucks and moving vans. The geometry has to accommodate the largest essential vehicle, not the average car.
This highlights the absolute importance of back-of-house matters. The loading and service access, often the most ignored part of a rendering, is really the operational heart of the building.
And service conflicts disrupt everything. Poorly designed loading zones lead to trucks backing into traffic, blocking public sidewalks, or idling in fire lanes, creating dangerous intersections with pedestrians. The lesson here, reinforced by every operational expert, is that back-of-house design directly dictates front-of-house success. A successful, highly trafficked building requires a seamless separated flow for public movement, service movement, and emergency movement. If those flows cross unnecessarily, you introduce chaos and liability.
Let's talk about the interfaces with code and accessibility, which, as you note, have to bridge the public and private realms.
Yes, compliance has to cross property lines seamlessly. ADA routes can't just start at the building entrance. They have to connect consistently from the public sidewalk. This requires the architect to coordinate the slope, the surface material, and the drainage with the civil engineer right up to the public right-of-way boundary. Similarly, fire access lanes have to have clear widths and load-bearing capacities governed by local ordinances, and they often require specific access control strategies like Knox boxes or automated gates that have to be coordinated with the local fire department during design.
It's also fascinating to see how zoning policy is evolving so rapidly to reflect cultural change. The move away from minimum parking requirements seems like the clearest indicator of this.
It's a direct response to urban densification and the shift towards transit and shared mobility. As cities actively reduce or eliminate minimum parking requirements, they free up immense space and reduce construction costs. A surface parking lot is expensive. An underground garage is exponentially more so. But this policy change requires architecture to anticipate new behavior shifts.
Such as the massive volume of ride-hail and delivery services.
Exactly. Drop-off and pickup zones are now mission-critical infrastructure. If the architecture fails to accommodate these transient uses, Uber, Lyft, Amazon, Instacart, the congestion just spills onto the street, disrupting traffic and causing safety hazards. An intelligent ground floor has to budget real estate for transient queuing space, covered drop-off canopies, and temporary loading docks that can handle the sheer volume of daily deliveries.
Let's put all this under pressure with our real-world scenario from the brief. Curb conflicts delay occupancy. An urban residential tower is nearing pre-occupancy. The certificate of occupancy is imminent, but the city planning or traffic department suddenly revises its curb regulations, eliminating the planned, dedicated commercial loading zone for a new transit priority corridor.
This is a major liability event, because without a legal loading zone, the building cannot operate, and the owner can't begin generating revenue. The immediate professional response has to be swift, coordinated, and rooted in the lessons of both governance and contract law.
What are the necessary professional steps and reasoning outlined in the mentorship brief?
The required reasoning starts with the legal framework. You have to immediately analyze the revised right-of-way rules and identify the specific statute or ordinance behind the change. Was this a new regulation, or was the original design approved based on outdated rules? Then, the team needs to swiftly reconfigure the loading and service access. This might involve negotiating a temporary loading zone designation on a side street, or rephasing the public sidewalk improvements to create a dedicated pull-off bay. The team also has to coordinate temporary and permanent solutions. Getting the building operational is priority one, but the long-term solution has to be implemented with minimal further disruption. Crucially, the architect must then document all changes and costs to protect liability. This scenario drives home the ultimate lesson. Leadership is clearest when regulations are ambiguous or suddenly change. The building isn't finished until the street works, and the architect must lead the political and logistical negotiation required to solve that external interface.
We've spanned this vast territory from the liabilities in a GMP contract all the way to the turning radius of a fire truck. Let's synthesize these two themes, internal governance and external movement, with the daily design drill. The intelligent ground floor. We're asked to design a mixed-use ground floor that eliminates private car parking and prioritizes deliveries, micromobility storage, and ADA access.
This drill demands that the architect operates right at the intersection of policy and design. Eliminating private parking frees up enormous space, but it requires you to maximize the efficiency of every other flow. Deliveries have to be swift, micromobility charging has to be safe and secure, and ADA access must be unambiguous. But to achieve architectural power literacy, we have to apply the procurement lessons from Section 2.
Right, so how does the contractual and procurement structure influence the design of this ground floor?
Well, the constraints specify that the design must show collaboration with the contractor and identify at least 3 key decisions made before full design is even complete. These are decisions that are rooted in risk reduction and cost certainty. So those 3 pre-design decisions might include 1. Confirming the location and structural requirements of the main service entry based on the contractor's preferred construction logistics plan. 2. Locking in the performance specification for the specialized fire suppression system required for the e-bike charging area, confirming pricing and availability early to avoid a massive change order later. And 3. Pre-negotiating the material specification for the public sidewalk to ensure it meets both the city's durability requirements and the aesthetic standard of the building, securing that cost before market fluctuations can interfere.
And most critically, the design must anticipate future urban changes.
Yes, the street edge must support changing curb regulations over time. This means designing flexible infrastructure, maybe using things like bollards, planters, and modular paving systems that can be easily converted. A current ride-hail drop-off zone could quickly become a dedicated loading bay for autonomous delivery vehicles or a parklet if the policy shifts. The design provides the physical framework for future governance changes.
Now for the ultimate test of professional reasoning. When design intent meets optimization, we have the scenario of a university science building delivered via progressive design build. The contractor, driven to meet a tight GMP, proposes substituting the specified high-performance facade system with a lower-cost standard commercial system. The contractor argues the cost reduction is necessary to keep the project on budget, but the change negatively impacts the aesthetic and spatial quality of the central atrium.
This is where the architect earns their fee and demonstrates true leadership. The contractor is meeting their contractual obligation to optimize for cost. The architect must meet their contractual obligation to protect the owner's vision and performance goals. The required workflow is methodical and objective. First, the architect must assess the functional and experiential impacts, not just the cost. How severely does this change degrade the science building's long-term energy performance? Does the change compromise the light quality in the atrium, which was a core component of the original vision for student well-being? This assessment has to be quantitative.
Then comes the essential legal check.
You have to determine contractual authority. Does the original performance specification for the facade explicitly mandate an energy standard that the cheaper system can't meet? If the contract specifies, for example, a maximum U value that the proposed system fails to achieve, then the architect has the contractual leverage to veto it. If the original spec was purely aesthetic, the authority is weaker. The architect must then present alternatives with clear trade-offs. Options A, B, and C detailing the initial savings, the estimated life cycle cost increase due to energy loss, and the performance erosion of each option. The ultimate goal is to negotiate a compromise without eroding trust, finding a third option that saves some costs while retaining the core intent. And then Critically, you document the owner's final decision with a clear explanation of the long-term cost implications.
That documentation is the liability shield. It confirms that the architect informed the owner of the consequences of that optimization.
Exactly. The power of the influential architect isn't in imposing a vision. It's in clearly framing the decision points and educating the owner on the long-term operational and financial implications of short-term cost savings.
So what is the final overarching mandate for architectural power literacy based on this really intense analysis?
It's the ability to perceive the building not as an isolated object, but as a system that's integrated with legal and physical governance. Truly influential architects understand that movement is architecture in motion, and that they have to design buildings, streets, and the surrounding policies as a unified, resilient system. This mastery is built on two major distinct areas. First, understanding procurement models, which shapes how the building is paid for, delivered, and who holds the financial risk. And second, understanding curb governance, which shapes how the building interacts with the constantly shifting mobility rules and public safety requirements. It's the synthesis of the boardroom contract and the curbstone regulation.
It's the difference between being a designer and being a true strategic partner who manages risk for the client at every single scale.
As you move forward into your own practice, we encourage you to reflect on the ultimate questions posed by this brief, which take you way beyond the schematic design phase. First, how does the way a project is delivered shape what gets designed? This asks you to look past your beautiful renderings and consider how the financial incentives, the liability structures, and the team collaboration agreements are already determining material choices, performance metrics, and the speed of execution.
And second, how does my architecture choreograph movement, not just space? This is about moving outside the front door and designing that essential interface, the access, the flow of people and vehicles that defines the long-term success of the building and its influence on the surrounding city. Because if the building is complete, but the street doesn't work, the project has failed.
Architects who master the mechanics of procurement, contracts, and governance don't just respond to these systems, they shape them. And in doing so, they secure a legacy where design excellence and institutional influence really do move together.
This Architectural Insights with KING-KAMBUF daily interdisciplinary mentorship brief is designed to advance you into that rare echelon of practice where your knowledge secures both design quality and financial predictability. Thank you for joining us for this analysis.